Hello, everyone. Oh, wow. It's just filling up. Wonderful, wonderful. I am Vander Gak. I'm Northeast SARE's communication specialist. While we're giving people here a moment to get settled, I'm going to launch a welcome poll, and then we're going to have a quick poll about today's session. This is the large grant pre-proposal learning session, and we can do a quick, while I get that poll launched, we can go around and have the Northeast SARE staff introduce ourselves.
I can jump in and start. Hi, everybody. I am Heather Omand. I use they and he pronouns. I'm the Associate Director at Northeast SARE, which basically means I am the grant operations lead, and I also am the grant administrator for the research and education program. And I will pass to Caitlin.
Good afternoon, Caitlin Cerna. I use she, they pronouns, and I am managing the Research for Novel Approaches grant program, which is up right now, and also the graduate student program, which we're in the process of finalizing applicants for this new year. Katie, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, folks. I am Katie Campbell-Nelson, the Professional Development Program Coordinator, she, her, and I'm located in New York, and it's nice to see you all here. Emma?
Hey folks, my name's Emma. I use she, her pronouns. I am the grant program specialist, so I support all of the awesome grant administrators on this call. And I am here as a note taker, so you won't hear too much from me, but I'm super happy that you're all here. I'll pass to Nevin.
Hello, Nevin Dawson, he, him. I am the Associate Coordinator for the Professional Development Program, so working closely with Katie on that program. I live in Maryland, and I've been with SARE for different ways for 10 years now.
Excellent timing. Wonderful. I am going to wrap up our welcome poll here and then start one specific to our talks today. And then we're going to move into an overview with Heather. All right, Sam, we've got that poll running for our 3 specific programs to get today. And yeah, Heather, take it away.
Great. Okay, everybody. So I'm going to start us off today with a very brief and to the point overview that's really going to be focused on supporting you to decide which grant program is the right fit for you. And then after we go through some slides, we'll have some full group question and answer time, again, to help you theoretically decide which breakout group you would then like to go into, which will be based on the 3 different programs that are currently accepting pre-proposals. So again, today's overview is going to be brief. I'm dropping the link to the full pre-recorded webinar in the chat. So if you want more detail, that is the overview kind, and that digs even a little bit deeper into the 3 grant programs, I highly recommend that. And then I'm going to start sharing my slide and my screens if I can manage all of said screens. Okay, great. Okay, so here are the 3 grant programs currently accepting pre-proposals at Northeast SARE. They are the Research and Education Grant Program, the Research for Novel Approaches Grant Program, and the Professional Development Grant Program. We call these the 2025 programs because although the proposal due dates are all in 2024, the awards will be made next year. So if you see that in our calls for proposals and in this conversation today, that's why we call them the 2025 large grant programs. So many screens. There we go. Okay. So here's some more detail on that timeline for you. The pre-proposal due date is this August 6th. That's a Tuesday of 2024, 5 p.m. sharp Eastern Standard Time. And we are very serious about our due dates and their timelines. So no proposals after 5 p.m. will be accepted. If you, on September 3rd, everyone who applies for a pre-proposal will be notified whether or not they have been invited to submit a full proposal. And then the due date for those full proposals will be October 29th of 2024. Again, 5 p.m. sharp Eastern Standard Time. Of those folks who submit full proposals, they will learn the decisions on whether their grant is going to be awarded or not in late February of 2025. And all contract start dates will be March 1st of 2025. That part is non-negotiable. Projects can start after March 1st, but the contract will say March 1st, which is really a good thing because that means that any expenses at March 1st or later can be reimbursed once your contract is in place. And so if you are awarded a grant with Northeast SARE through these programs, it is important to note that the contracting process between Northeast SARE's host organization, University of Vermont, and your organization can take 1 to 2 months. So during March, we'll be meeting one-on-one with all of our new grantees to help orient them and guide them through the process. And then their contract will be finalized in April or May of 2025. These are all of the eligible organizations to apply for these 3 grant programs. They include extension agencies, colleges, universities, for-profit businesses, municipalities, nonprofits, tribal governments, state and federal departments. And it's often useful to lift up that applicants and host organizations can be located outside of the Northeast region as long as the project activities and the audience being served are located in the Northeast region. This chart shows some differences between the 3 grant programs that are currently accepting pre-proposals, and I'm going to walk through them. So both the research and education and the professional development program require a performance target. This is a fancy, jargony way of saying whatever the outcome you expect to be of your project, if everything goes exactly to plan, which Northeast SARE staff understands very rarely happens, but we want to hear from you what you imagine is possible if your project goes exactly to plan. And then each of our programs funds a different of work audience. So the research and education program, any project that's funded must include a robust farmer education project that will result in measurable on-farm changes, which is described in that performance target I just mentioned, leading to greater sustainability. The focus on farmer behavior change is a key requirement of the research and education program, which may also include an applied research component that is directly relevant to and supports the education program. Applicants are generally researchers, farmers, and educators, and really anybody who works with farmers. And I really just want to lift up that the research and education program actually only requires farmer education. You can include a research component, but we do fund several projects that are only education. And then a research for novel approaches project must include a strong proof of concept applied research component that is intended to confirm the benefits and or feasibility of new practices and approaches that have high potential for adoption by farmers in the near future. Applicants are generally researchers, but can come from any of those eligible organizations that I mentioned previously, including community organizations, consultants, or more traditional research institutions. And it's really important to note that research that has supportive evidence already, that is directly relevant to farmers, and that is close to adoption is really the core focus of this program. With the professional development program, a typical project is going to require, provide education for educators and service providers who work with farmers. We often refer to this as the train the trainer approach. These service providers then use what they've learned through their participation in the project in their work with farmers, which is described by the performance target. Applicants are generally people who work with farmers, educators, and/or service providers, and education for service providers is the core focus of this program. Remember, with research and education for farmers is the core focus. So the minimum funding level for each of these programs is $30,000, and there is no funding cap for any of them. The upper end of proposals typically funded is usually around $250,000 for research and education, usually around $200,000 for research for novel approaches, and usually around $150,000 for professional development, but it's all depending on the specific project's complexity and duration. Those were differences. Here are some similarities between the three large grant programs. They all fund projects between 1 and 3 years long. A pre-proposal is required. You can submit a proposal unless you have an approved pre-proposal. All three programs require an advisory committee, although you don't have to describe the advisory committee until the full proposal phase. It's still important to note that it is eventually a required component, and that has to consist of at least 2 farmers and 1 agricultural service provider. And then the use of funds is the same for all 3 programs. So eligible expenses include things like labor, materials and supplies, services, meeting and training expenses, subawards to partner organizations, indirect costs up to 10% of total direct costs, and project-specific equipment, while ineligible expenses generally include any costs that are used to start or expand farming operations, such as quote-unquote regular or common farming equipment, land, structures, other capital investments. Those are not allowable use of funds. Many of you may be aware that we took last year off. 5 of our grant programs were paused in the 2023 to 2024 cycle. And this gave staff the capacity we really needed to begin the process of reorganizing our structure, revisiting our culture, and redesigning our grant programs at Northeast SARE. And if you're interested in that work, there's a link on the screen. You can go there to learn more about how we've been articulating our values, our culture, our strategic plan. But I think it's important to note that for this cycle, the 3 programs we're discussing are largely unchanged. However, the incredible folks in our grant making redesign working group are actively rebuilding some of our calls for proposals from the ground up. So it is possible that you will continue to see substantial changes perhaps next year and in the years to come. And we just want to be transparent about that we are continuing to evolve and grow and change. So in the next slide, I am going to talk about the one notable change that we did make this year in our calls for proposals. And that includes how we approach underserved farming communities in the application. So we shaped this. We still encourage connections with underserved and especially Black, Indigenous, and people of color farming communities. And there are 2 questions in the pre-proposal. One that asks about the farming communities you plan to serve, how you know what their needs are, that they want to work with you to address those needs, etc. And that question applies regardless of what communities you are working with. And then there is this historically underserved farming communities question. The response to this question is no longer optional, and the responses regarding connections to communities and engagement with these audiences is now scored. So in order to receive the highest possible score on this section, the project must engage with at least one historically underserved farming community as defined by the USDA. However, it's not a requirement to submit a proposal. So the difference there is you can check that none of the above box, still submit a proposal and still get funded. You're just not going to get the highest score for this section when reviewers consider this section. Those invited to submit full proposals, it's important to note, will be expected to demonstrate an authentic connection with the farming communities the project will serve, including those indicated with these check boxes. And so just to like really emphasize this point, it is better for an applicant to submit a proposal focused on communities they do have authentic and meaningful relationships with than it would be for an applicant to submit a proposal, check some of these boxes, and then fail to document those strong, authentic, and meaningful relationships with those communities. Just really wanted to lift that up. And then my last slide for you all before we open it up for some questions is to support your planning as you consider writing a pre-proposal. So at the pre-proposal stage, Northeast SARE does not require host organization approval. So we don't require any documentation from your organization that says, yes, we commit to host this project. This is really a concept document. We also don't require any budget information at the pre-proposal phase. But just know that if you're invited to submit a full proposal, then we require a very detailed budget. And Northeast SARE, in none of our grant programs currently at this time, we do not require or ask for any matching funds of any kind. So keep that in mind. Other important details to just keep to consider is that we are a reimbursement-based grant type. So you have to spend the money before we reimburse the money. So if you were to be funded by us, you would submit an invoice and then that invoice would be reimbursed within 30 days. Results of funded projects are always part of the public domain. And if you need a disability-related accommodation at any phase in the process, please let us know as soon as possible so that we can really do our very best to support you. Okay. That is all that I have for slides. And now we have some time for some questions.
And we already have one in the chat from Gabby. And so how are we scoring authentic and meaningful relationships with communities?
This is a beautiful question. Thank you. So I should lift up that in all of our calls for proposals, next to every question, the review criteria is posted right there in a fun little gray box in italicized script. And so if you look at the farming community and needs or the related question in the pre-proposal, that's what it's called for research and education. There's a series of questions that you are asked to address. Who are the farmers served by the project? What are their needs and what needs do the project address? How do you know this is a need? What is the project's proposed solution and how does it contribute? And then so based on that information, again, pre-proposals are short concept documents. So reviewers, there's no doubt about it. They're working with incomplete information, but they're doing the best they can based on your answers to those questions and the review criteria that's posted right there. And then if you're invited to submit a full proposal, we will then be asking for quite a bit more information related to these points at that time.
And we've got another question in the chat. Please feel free to throw questions in there. I'm going to leave this poll open for another minute or so and then close it out. And then I can also start throwing in questions that we got from the start here. But Jennifer, in the chat, how does salary reimbursement work with FTE percentages working on projects for full-time university staff?
I can try to answer this question, and if there's a nuance that I didn't get, feel free to add that. So you put salary in the budget based on whatever way that your institution calculates it. We do prefer it in percent of FTE of the individuals allocated to the project, but you can also do number of hours with an hourly rate. That's what goes in your budget. And then when your organization invoices us, they have a line that says salary, and whatever you spent on salary in that past period that you're invoicing for is what we reimburse for, as long as it is in alignment with the approved budget that you applied with. Vander, do you want me to just go through the questions in the chat? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. So the next one that I see, and also like other Northeast SARE staff, please feel free to jump in and be like, hey, Heather, here's some more nuance that I want to add. Great. Okay, so the next question, do you ever consider training programs for growing a crop with persons who are incarcerated? So Northeast SARE has essentially a pretty wide open, like there are no topics that we generally do or do not fund, or audiences that we do or do not fund. Our limitation that you need to be mindful of is our definition of a farm. And so we are legislated to, the reason our grant program exists is to serve farmers. And so we have the definition of a farm on our website, and maybe if another Northeast SARE staff person's feeling crafty, they could drop that link in the chat. That really, that's where the limitations come in. So if the farm that people are working on meets our definition of a farm as outlined in the document, then it can be, the audience served can really be anyone. But there are some like generally we don't do community gardening projects because they often don't, although they can, meet our definition of a farm. And so that's the kind of thing where if you have really specific questions about whether the project meets that definition of a farm, I recommend you reach out to a staff member, the person, the liaison for the program you're interested in applying to directly, so that we can have those really nuanced conversations with you.
Yeah, and I might just quickly add something about that, that we certainly fund training programs for farm employees.
Yes.
And that could include incarcerated persons.
Thank you, Katie. Can the same PI, principal investigator, and or project leader, we use those terms sort of interchangeably at Northeast SARE, make a pre-proposal for more than one of the grants? Yes, you can submit pre-proposals to more than one of the programs. However, if multiple pre-proposals are invited to submit a full proposal, you will have to choose one. And so at that point, let's say you had an invited pre-proposal to the research and education program, you had an invited pre-proposal to the professional development program, you would only be able to submit one of those. Can you have an existing 2024 Northeast SARE grant when you are applying? Yes. Can a farmer be the host organization, but have a service provider partner submit their own expenses for reimbursement? So this question has got some nuance behind it. Generally, the host organization that receives the grant is responsible for accumulating the expenses of their partners and submitting them all as one invoice to Northeast SARE, and then they distribute that money back out. However, when a farmer applies to Northeast SARE, they generally get, we're getting like really in the weeds here, folks, but they generally get a different type of contract than a nonprofit or a university would. And so sometimes we do break those contracts up where one contract goes to the farmer who's the lead on the project, and then their university partner has a second contract. But there's a lot, again, I encourage you to reach out directly to the person who manages the program you're interested in, because there's a lot more detail behind that. How is the proposed budget limit adherence assured in the back reimbursement format? Jarmila, if you are, forgive me, first of all, if I mispronounced your name, and second of all, if you're willing to come off mute and clarify this question for me, I would really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about confusion. So
No.
I am typically, the grants would work that we get the money and then we, with the budget. So now you kind of have line items to allocate certain budget to certain activities. So how does this budget kind of come in this format when you're reimbursing the expenses to the organization? How do you assure that the limit is, I guess, followed, or, they don't go over the limit? I guess, am I making it a little helpful, a little clearer?
I think so. Yeah. Let me answer and you can tell me if I'm off the mark or not. So we have an incredible finance team at Northeast SARE who, to be perfectly honest with you, is going to scrutinize every invoice a funded project sends to us and make sure that the line items and the categories are in alignment with the approved budget. And if they're not going to pay it until you either submit a budget modification that's approved by the grant administrator, or like that we figure out, oh, there was a miscommunication or a misunderstanding. So the level of scrutiny is high, but so is the level of customer service. We're very flexible at Northeast SARE. We have some parameters around what changes you can make and to what extent you can make them. But in general, we really take pride in being very flexible and recognizing that things change.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Would it be possible to include a subaward for a cooperator outside of the Northeast? Yes, yes,
Heather-
and yes. That
Heather,
happened.
just a quick
Oh.
one on that. There's Kenny's question is also is acting about the restrictions on the Northeast, so we can talk about the restrictions generally. 3 below, Kenny Walker, is there a service area restricted to the Northeast?
Is a service area. Okay, so you're bundling these questions, Vander. Okay, let me answer the one that I was speaking of, and then I will skip down to that one. Okay, so it is possible to include a subaward for a cooperator outside of the Northeast. That happens at Northeast SARE. Again, it comes back to the vast majority of the project activities and the audience served has to be in the Northeast. But if you have a small component of the project that is happening like right outside our borders, that's fine. But really the vast majority of the activities and the audience has got to be in the Northeast. And now I'm gonna go down to Kenny Walker. Is the service area restricted? Yes. So again, project activities, audience has to be in the Northeast region as defined in our calls and on our website. Okay. If you are a beginning researcher in this field and don't have an already established authentic connection to an underserved farming community, is that a weakness for the research grant application? Is it a strength to establish a new connection as part of the research grant application? So I think when you say research grant, I think we're talking research for novel approaches. And the question is formatted differently for research because we recognize that research is not always community-based. Sometimes it might be lab-based. And so the question is formulated differently for the Novel Approaches program. And Caitlin, do you want to be the one to answer this or do you want me to keep rolling?
You can keep rolling, but I might have some additions. Thanks.
Okay. So as we mentioned, when reviewers are considering scoring your pre-proposal, they are not going to give you full credit if your project doesn't include at least one historically underserved farming community. That being said, you would also not get good credit if you indicate that, yes, I'm going to serve these communities, but then clearly don't have meaningful connections with them. So it's really any applicant is going to be best served by being honest about who the communities are that they have meaningful relationships with, who actually want to be working with that applicant, and then articulating the needs and the project activities that are going to be of best service to that community. And so I think that that's really the best way to answer your question, Nicholas, is it has to be of service to the community that you are trying to work with. And reviewers are going to be doing their best. Certainly a grant proposal application is not the most effective way to evaluate someone's connection to a community, but we are doing our best as an organization to gesture towards that in the ways that we can. And that's it.
I would just add, meaningful does not equate long-standing. Like meaningful is intention, how you're describing the activities and partnership and collaboration. Those could be new relationships. It just needs to be authentic and meaningful. It doesn't have to be like, we've worked with this group or this community for years and years.
And I want to add that if you're doing work that's involved in sustainable agriculture, it probably is having an impact on your food system locally. And so you do have a meaningful relationship. There are communities that you have meaningful relationships with, and you want to be thinking about those communities, regardless of whether or not they're underserved in the grants that you're writing, because that's where your work is going to be having an impact. We are approaching our time on this. Do we want to be opening up breakout rooms and then keeping these larger questions rolling here? Or do we want to proceed through the rest of the questions and then open up breakout rooms after?
I would suggest, why don't I go through Carl's question? And then we'll have a little less time for breakout rooms this one, but this is generally the format we intend for all 4 of the Q&A sessions. So we will probably have more time for breakout groups in the future, but we'll still have, I would say, at least 20 minutes today. Does that sound good to staff? Okay. All right, so the next question, for the Research for Novel Approaches program, are new technology development projects considered eligible? If so, at what stage of technological development are most awardees? The real thing here is, folks, there has to be some research already showing that this has the potential for adoption by farmers, and it has to be close to adoption. So it's sort of that, like, we're almost there, but we need a little bit more research, and we think that that would get us there. But that's the best answer that I could give. New technology, we have had proposals funded around that, but it needs to be pretty close to adoption. Caitlin, is there any more that you would say?
No, I guess just our most awardees. We can show you in breakout rooms how to search our database of funded projects, which might be helpful, but it's hard to encompass all, 20 years of projects and proposals, and technology is a little harder to hit on, but I think that's it.
Okay. And then the next question, with regards to the definition of greater sustainability, we're looking at the shortage of hands-on training for beginning farmers in our state, that they need to be able to comply with federal food safety regulations as well as market access in order to grow their farm and increase profitability. Is food safety training for beginning farmers something SARE would consider a focus that would lead to greater sustainability? Yes, we have funded food safety training for farmers at all stages in the past, and it really is going to depend on making the case to your reviewers that this is what your audience needs.
The next question is about the professional development program. So can professional development grant replicate a previously SARE funded project in a different location, or would an entirely new project be preferred? So we do fund replicated projects if there's a need in that particular community. So say it's been replicated somewhere else, but it's actually very necessary for your community, that would make entire sense to apply. And in the full proposal application, there will be an opportunity to include previous work, and that would be an important place to reference previously funded SARE grants, how your project is different, and all the needs that go on from there. And this answer is actually true for any of the grant programs, honestly. Thanks.
The next question is, could we include the development of a strategy to engage underserved farmers in our grant? The answer is yes. And I would just say that reviewers are going to be looking to see that that is done in a way that is not extractive to the community. And so again, that's very difficult to evaluate in a grant program. And so in a grant application. And so, or at least for us, we're new to that. Let's just be transparent and put it that way. And so I just encourage you to be thoughtful about that and to be transparent about how you're thinking about that to the extent that you're able to within word counts. And then the last question that I'm going to answer now before Caitlin introduces the breakout groups is, do you provide grants to watershed associations for watershed-based conservation projects like green infrastructure and practices to help minimize the adverse impacts of climate change? I'm going to go back to something I said earlier, which is we legislatively exist as a grant program to serve farmers. And so you're going to have to make the case about how farmers are your primary audience, or if you're thinking about the professional development program, how people who work with farmers are your primary audience. And so that's really the nuance of that. There's no straight answer I can give to that question besides just remember why Northeast SARE exists, farmers.
Great. Okay, so we have 25 minutes. We are going to break out into 3 different rooms by grant program. So we have research and education, research for novel approaches, and professional development. And then at the end of the breakout rooms at 2 o'clock, we're not going to come back together again. So this is going to be kind of the last hurrah of us all as a group. But I do want to say that we have 3 more sessions. So you can join. Your registration and link that you have will give you access to any of our Q&A sessions. And we will have a cumulative list of the questions and answers in each breakout room published to our website. Just give us a few days to get that up and published, but you can use that as a resource if you weren't able to hop between rooms, or if you just have other questions that didn't get a chance to answer. You can look at that, come to another session, and then all of the grant admins here today are definitely here henceforward until you apply. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. All right, so to